What Indian just announced for 2026 is bigger than anyone expected. And if the supplier leaks are accurate, this move hits Harley-Davidson right at its weakest point. Indian is launching a true midweight heritage bike built from real steel, priced below anything Harley can touch, without rewriting their entire business model. And when you see the price targets and engineering notes buried in these documents, you'll understand exactly why Harley has no answer for this. Stick around till the end, because the last piece of this leak is the part Harley absolutely does not want you to hear. What's happening? No one expected Indian to drop a bombshell in the middle of the model year lull. Most riders were still debating small updates, minor paint changes, or the usual marketing noise that floats through the industry each winter. Instead, Indian delivered something else entirely. With no warning, no teaser campaign, and no slow build-up. They released the outline of their 2026 lineup, and the moment it hit the wire, the reaction inside the motorcycle world shifted from curiosity to genuine alarm. Dealers started calling one another before the press had even finished uploading the details. Shop owners went silent as they read the early statements. Social feeds lit up in under an hour. And for seasoned riders who have watched this industry for decades, there was a single shared reaction. Where in the world did this come from? The shock was not because Indian announced another premium tourer or a paint refresh. It was because the announcement came abruptly, with a tone that felt more like a manufacturer declaring a new era rather than releasing another model year. The changes hinted at deeper intentions, the kind that ripple through a market and force competitors to adjust whether they want to or not. Even the timing was strange. Most companies hold these announcements for midsummer hype or major rallies, but Indian dropped theirs quietly, almost like slipping a letter under the door of an industry that had gotten too comfortable. For a moment, the motorcycle world felt genuinely unstable, as if a familiar rhythm had been interrupted. And that was only the beginning. The shock faded quickly, replaced by a far bigger question. Why would Indian shift its strategy at this precise moment? The strategy shift. No one predicted. When the dust settled, riders and analysts began reading between the lines. Indian was not just announcing new models. They were repositioning themselves entirely. For over a decade, they had played in the premium lane, aiming directly at the high-dollar touring and performance cruiser crowd. That identity seemed carved in stone. But now, with one announcement, Indian signaled a move into a broader, heritage-driven segment that had not been part of their roadmap in years. This was not a tweak. It was a U-turn. Industry veterans immediately recognized the weight of that decision. A shift like this comes from deep inside a company's culture, from conversations behind closed doors, where long-term survival is measured not by tradition, but by honesty about what the market truly wants. Indian seemed to be admitting that the future was not in ever heavier, ever costlier machines, but in simpler, more approachable motorcycles that still carry a sense of identity and pride. They were stepping into a space where mechanical familiarity matters more than touchscreens, and where riders want something they can wrench on without needing a computer. For many, this sudden pivot felt like the beginning of a cultural realignment. Riders who had grown tired of constant feature creep saw a glimmer of something they feared had been lost. And competitors who had ignored this segment now had a reason to worry. The real shock came when Indian revealed the machine that would anchor this entire shift. If you want real rider-focused analysis without corporate spin, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts below. Your experience helps shape every breakdown we do, and it keeps discussions grounded in real miles and real stories. The classic-style midweight that changes everything. At the center of Indian's announcement was a motorcycle unlike anything they had built in years. It was a mid-weight machine built around steel, simplicity, and old-school presence. Instead of chasing futuristic lines or piling on layered technology, Indian introduced a retro-styled model, clearly inspired by the philosophy behind the Royal Enfield Classic 350. Not a copy, not an imitation, but a motorcycle grounded in the same spirit: elemental design, metal fenders, exposed hardware, a mechanical heartbeat that a rider can feel through the bars. Scaled up for American roads and expectations, the new machine promised something long absent from the mainstream market. A bike that does not demand a second mortgage, does not overwhelm the senses, and does not chase unnecessary complexity. It was built to be ridden, maintained, and personalized by the rider, not protected by dealership-only diagnostics. And in doing that, Indian tapped into something deeper than nostalgia. They tapped into a longing for motorcycles with character, machines that do not need to shout to be respected. Within hours of the announcement, shops and riders began speculating on what this model meant for the future. It was not just another option. It was a sign that a major American brand believed simplicity had value again. And if simplicity was returning, one question rose fast. Why had the market leader left this door wide open? If you need reliable riding gear and accessories, I've linked my trusted picks in the description. Grab what you need, and let's continue. The segment, Harley Ignored, becomes Indian's opening. For over a decade, Harley-Davidson focused on touring platforms, luxury detailing, and premium pricing tiers. The strategy made sense for their loyal base, but it created a quiet absence in the lower and midweight heritage space. Riders who wanted a straightforward, affordable, steel-built motorcycle found themselves looking overseas or digging through used listings because no American manufacturer offered a machine in that category anymore. Harley chased refinement. They chased margins, but they left an entire segment untouched. Indian recognized that gap, not with criticism, but with calculation. By stepping into the affordable heritage category, they were not fighting Harley's strengths. They were exploiting an area Harley had chosen not to defend. For riders who grew up on simple V-twins, or for younger riders wanting a mechanical entry point into American motorcycling, Indian now appeared to offer something Harley had not delivered in years: an approachable, honest motorcycle that feels like the machines many riders learned on decades ago. This was not a direct attack. It was a strategic use of an open lane. And industry observers knew immediately that the ripple effects would be felt far beyond a single model year. With the shock established, the next step is understanding the proof behind Indian's move and the internal decisions that made it possible. The internal memos that revealed the real motive. The first real clues about Indian's intentions did not come from public statements. They came from planning documents quietly circulated inside the company months before the announcement. Several employees described these memos as unusually blunt. Instead of market jargon or optimistic projections, they focused on a single problem that had followed the industry for years. Motorcycles were becoming too complex, too insulated from the rider, and too expensive for everyday ownership. The memos pointed to a rising demand for machines built with metal rather than molded plastic, with hardware accessible by hand rather than by special tools, and with engines that invited mechanical understanding instead of hiding behind layers of electronics. It was a return to a rider-first philosophy, not as nostalgia, but as a practical response to what riders had been asking for. The documents emphasized that simplicity was not a step backward. It was a strategy rooted in respect for riders who valued control, durability, and authenticity. They showed an awareness that a large portion of the market did not want high-tech dashboards or more riding modes. They wanted steel tanks, straightforward maintenance, and machines that felt alive. Indian was not guessing. They were listening to the ground beneath them. But to execute a philosophy this bold, they needed leadership capable of steering a cultural shift from the top. The leadership team behind the pivot. When Indian's reorganization became public, many riders overlooked the significance of the new names attached to its executive board. Several of the hires came from competing motorcycle companies, individuals who had spent decades inside the industry and understood exactly what had been lost in the race toward premium features. These leaders were not theorists. They had mechanical backgrounds, dealership experience, or long tenures in product development, where real-world rider feedback shaped their decisions. Their arrival signaled more than a structural change. It indicated a cultural reset inside Indian. One executive in particular had a reputation for cutting through corporate noise and refocusing attention on rider experience rather than marketing ambitions. Another had spent years analyzing patterns in the used motorcycle market, studying why certain simple machines kept their value while newer, more complicated models struggled. Together, the team pushed for a direction that prioritized clarity over complexity. They argued that a motorcycle should speak for itself through feel, sound, and behavior, not through a spec sheet loaded with features few riders truly used. This leadership group challenged assumptions that had guided Indian for years. They brought skepticism toward unnecessary refinement and a respect for the kind of machines built during eras when metal and craftsmanship defined the ride. Leadership could set the direction, but the real proof of change would show up on the factory floor. The manufacturing philosophy nobody saw coming. As plans for the new midweight model progressed, the biggest surprise appeared in how Indian intended to build it. Instead of relying on the same production methods used for their premium touring machines, they redesigned sections of the manufacturing process to emphasize accessibility and durability. Metal components replaced composite parts where possible. Fasteners were chosen for compatibility with common tools. Wiring routes were simplified, and assemblies were designed to be removable without dismantling half the motorcycle. These choices were not cosmetic. They reflected a deeper shift toward practical ownership. Riders who maintain their own machines understand the difference instantly. When a manufacturer chooses bolts that can be reached without stripping away plastic, or when a fuel system can be serviced without a proprietary interface, it shows respect for the rider's hands and knowledge. Indian leaned into that philosophy with intention. They wanted a motorcycle that a rider could understand by looking at it, not one that demanded hidden diagnostics or specialized equipment. Even suppliers sensed the shift. Several reported adjustments in material orders, indicating a move toward thicker steel in places where lighter alternatives had previously dominated. Indian was signaling that longevity mattered again, and that this new model would be built to earn a reputation rather than rely on branding. These factory decisions became possible only because Indian made one financial move that revealed their true priorities: the budget reallocation. That told the truth. No strategic shift becomes real until the budget reflects it. Inside Indian, the most telling change was how funds were moved across departments during the early planning stages. Money that once supported feature expansion, digital integration, and technology-heavy development began flowing into metalwork, frame improvement, and mechanical refinement. Departments tasked with chasing the next big gadget found themselves trimmed. Workshops dedicated to steel fabrication and retro engineering received renewed investment. It was a quiet but decisive reallocation, and it told the truth more clearly than any speech. This financial shift confirmed that Indian was not attempting to mimic trends set by competitors. They were carving their own path, betting on a future where rider connection mattered more than dashboard size. Allocating real money toward simplicity showed that they understood the demands of riders who valued reliability, wrenchability, and character. For those who had spent years watching the industry drift toward luxury pricing and electronic complexity, this was a refreshing correction. Indian was choosing to build a motorcycle that relied on craftsmanship instead of software updates, and they were putting their budget behind that choice. The implications of this financial redirection extended beyond a single model year. It suggested a long-term commitment to a design language and production style grounded in mechanical honesty and accessible ownership. With the internal decisions laid bare, the next question becomes how the outside world reacts when a major manufacturer disrupts the market in such a fundamental way. The shockwave. Through investors and analysts. When Indian revealed its new direction, investors were not prepared for the depth of the move. For years, the financial sector viewed Indian as a premium competitor with slow but steady growth, leaning on higher-priced models aimed at riders who were already deep into the lifestyle. But when the announcement showed that Indian was targeting the stable, mature rider base that Harley had depended on for decades, analysts quickly realized that the shift was not cosmetic. It was a direct economic challenge aimed at the foundation of the American cruiser market. Reports circulated through investment desks as analysts studied the implications. The new model struck at a demographic known for loyalty, long-term ownership, and consistent spending habits. If Indian captured even a small portion of that group, the revenue curves long assumed to favor Harley could tip in unexpected ways. Several firms expressed concern that Harley's long-standing advantage in brand identity might not be enough if riders gravitated toward a simpler, more affordable machine that still delivered the emotional connection they valued. Market projections that once assumed predictable growth began showing alternative paths, some of which reflected significant risk for Harley if the shift continued. Investors understood that motorcycle culture moves slowly, but when it moves with permanence. That financial tremor was only the first sign, because the cultural reaction among riding communities carried even more weight. Riding clubs react to the return of mechanical simplicity. Long-distance riders and club veterans have always held strong opinions about the direction of American motorcycles. When news spread of Indian's retro-styled, mechanically grounded mid-weight model, the conversations inside clubhouses shifted almost overnight. Riders who had spent years maintaining their own machines recognized the appeal of a bike built around accessible hardware rather than layered electronics. For many, the new model represented something they feared had disappeared from the modern market: a motorcycle that feels honest the moment you sit on it. Older riders spoke openly about how machines used to communicate through vibration, sound, and mechanical rhythm, rather than dashboards and settings menus. The simplicity of the new Indian triggered memories of the first long rides taken decades ago, back when a motorcycle's reliability depended on the rider's hands and knowledge, rather than dealership diagnostics. Younger members, who had grown tired of rising prices and increasingly complicated systems, saw the appeal as well. A midweight motorcycle built with real steel and straightforward engineering fit the needs of riders who wanted to grow into the lifestyle without needing a large loan. In many clubs, the response was not rivalry or hostility. It was respect for a manufacturer willing to build a machine that honored the traditions riders cared about most. That respect signaled a cultural turning point. As riders formed their opinions, dealerships braced for the changes that would follow. If you want to stay ahead of the industry shifts shaping the next decade of American motorcycling, make sure you are subscribed. Every new update builds on the last, and staying connected ensures you never miss the changes that matter most. Dealerships face a new kind of buyer. Dealerships across the country began preparing for an unexpected shift in customer behavior. For years, many shops had become accustomed to selling larger, luxury-oriented machines loaded with accessories and comfort features. These models brought strong margins, but required significant financing and attracted buyers ready to make a major commitment. The introduction of a simpler, steel-focused, mid-weight motorcycle from Indian created an entirely different customer profile, and dealerships knew they had to adjust quickly. Buyers interested in the new model were not looking for premium packages or layered technology. They wanted durability, authenticity, and a motorcycle that could be understood without reading a 50-page manual. Dealers realized that conversations on the showroom floor would change as well. Instead of showcasing infotainment systems, they would need to highlight metalwork, service access, and long-term reliability. Some dealers acknowledged that this shift felt like returning to an older style of selling, where the motorcycle spoke for itself, and the rider envisioned years of personal maintenance rather than scheduled electronic updates. Shops that carried both major American brands noticed early interest from riders who had previously overlooked Indian entirely. The midweight model created curiosity among buyers who wanted simplicity without sacrificing identity. For dealerships, this was more than a new product. It was the beginning of a new kind of sales environment. And while dealers adjusted, the aftermarket world moved even faster. The aftermarket scrambled to catch up. Independent builders, fabricators, and parts suppliers reacted with remarkable speed once the details of Indian's midweight model became public. Many had anticipated that simplicity might return to the market eventually, but few expected a major manufacturer to commit to it so directly. Within days, aftermarket shops began studying the frame geometry, hardware layout, and accessory points to determine how quickly they could produce upgrades that matched the bike's philosophy. For builders accustomed to working on larger touring platforms, the appeal of a straightforward, steel-based motorcycle was obvious. Machines built with accessible fasteners and open design language invite creativity, and fabricators saw opportunities in exhausts, seats, racks, bars, and lighting setups that could be installed by riders in their own garages. Parts distributors reported early inquiries from shops wanting to secure inventory positions before demand surged. Some custom builders even described the new model as a canvas, a chance to bring back the tradition of garage personalization that had defined earlier eras of American motorcycling. The aftermarket world thrives when riders feel connected to their machines, and Indian had provided a platform specifically designed for hands-on ownership. This scramble was not chaotic. It was enthusiastic. The industry recognized that a motorcycle built around simplicity would generate steady demand for accessories that enhanced the ride without complicating it. In many ways, the aftermarket reacted faster than the dealers, with reactions spreading across every corner of the industry. The broader consequences now begin to take shape on a national and global scale. The international domino effect. Indian's decision to return to mechanical simplicity did not just send ripples across the American market. Overseas manufacturers felt the shift almost immediately. Brands in Europe and Asia that had spent years refining retro aesthetics without altering their underlying engines now watched closely as an American company entered the same territory with a more grounded, steel-focused approach. Several international firms began reassessing their own mid-weight development plans after seeing how quickly riders responded to Indian's announcement. The appeal of a straightforward, approachable motorcycle was not limited to the United States. It reflected a global appetite for machines that looked classic, felt authentic, and avoided unnecessary complication. In markets where retro models already hold strong positions, analysts speculated that new competitors might accelerate their development schedules. Designers who had been considering plastic-intensive styling trends reconsidered their direction, seeing that riders were returning to material honesty as a form of identity. Even in countries where licensing restrictions favor smaller engines, the idea of a sturdier, more elemental motorcycle resonated with younger riders who valued craftsmanship over electronics. International trade publications began discussing whether Indian had inadvertently sparked a new era in global motorcycling, one driven by humility in engineering rather than escalation in features. Manufacturers who ignored the trend risked being left behind, as riders across continents recognized the value of simplicity again. But while global brands examined their options, political and labor forces inside the United States began asking harder questions. Labor, manufacturing, and political voices enter the discussion. As Indian's strategy gained attention, conversations around domestic labor and manufacturing grew louder. For years, debates over outsourcing and automation had shaped political arguments across the motorcycle industry. When Indian committed to building a motorcycle grounded in steel, straightforward assembly, and traditional craftsmanship, labor advocates saw an opportunity. The shift towards simpler mass-market production raised questions about whether more manufacturing tasks could return to American facilities. Unions pointed to the new model as evidence that the industry did not need to rely entirely on complex, outsourced components to build competitive motorcycles. Policy voices weighed in, arguing that a return to mechanical simplicity could strengthen weakened domestic supply chains and revive skilled trades like machining and welding. Others worried that more American production might raise costs in an affordability-driven segment. Indian became the center of this debate, its engineering shift reopening long-standing questions about how motorcycles should be built and where those jobs belong. While political voices debated possibilities, financial analysts turned their attention to the future structure of the cruiser market itself. Analysts predict a reshaped cruiser market. Economic analysts watch the unfolding situation with a cautious eye, recognizing that Indian's move could force a widespread reshaping of the cruiser market. For years, the heavyweight touring segment had dominated revenue charts, supported by riders willing to invest in larger, well-equipped machines. But with rising costs, shifting demographics, and increasing interest in simpler motorcycles, analysts began forecasting a gradual contraction in the high-end touring category. The emergence of a steel-built midweight from a major American brand accelerated those projections. Analysts projected rising demand for accessible, moderately priced motorcycles, as riders sought practical machines without financial strain. Younger buyers favored classic styling with affordability, while longtime riders welcomed lighter second bikes that kept authenticity intact. Manufacturers dependent on premium pricing faced pressure as the midweight segment grew. Touring models were not doomed, but the market would rebalance, rewarding brands that adapted and challenging those clinging to luxury alone. These economic forecasts led to the final question, one that reaches beyond numbers and focuses on the soul of American motorcycling. What this means for the future of American riding culture. The rise of a simple, steel-focused midweight motorcycle from an American manufacturer carries weight beyond sales charts and industry reports. It challenges long-held assumptions about what defines American riding culture. For decades, the narrative centered around size, presence, and long-distance capability, supported by machines known for their commanding silhouettes and highway comfort. But culture evolves, and so do the expectations of riders who want motorcycles that reflect their own relationship with the road. Indian's move suggests a renewed respect for heritage, not as branding but as function. A motorcycle built around mechanical clarity speaks to riders who believe that connection is formed through direct engagement with the machine. If this trend continues, it could reshape the values that guide American motorcycling. Heritage may become less about large displacement and more about authenticity. Simplicity may replace complexity as the marker of craftsmanship. Rideable, maintainable machines may reclaim status in a culture that once prized them as essential. If Indian claims the segment built on honesty and mechanical tradition, other American manufacturers must decide whether to follow. The future depends on choosing soul over features, preserving the bond between rider and machine as the market shifts and riders rethink what truly matters. So that's the truth behind Indian's 2026 move and why Harley can't brush this one off. Now, I want to hear from the riders who've lived this stuff, not the marketing teams. Could this actually shake Harley's future? Or is the legend too strong to crack? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you appreciate Straight Talk, hit like and subscribe. It helps keep this channel rolling.